Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Donald Trump may be the first president in American history who has been openly opposed by the Witches Union. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. This will not be a political program. It's just a sneaky way of trying to tie things into current events as we record this the week leading up to Halloween. News, again, that witches across the United States are attempting to throw a binding spell on the president. Witchcraft, however, is something that comes around every year. Witchcraft has been a source of popular entertainment here in the United States for a long time. It certainly is a theme that recurs at Halloween each year. But where does it originate? And is it something that we should take so lightly as sort of something to ha-ha about? Is it something that women should be considering as an avenue toward self-discovery and fulfillment and empowerment? Joining me to discuss this, as we do every year at about this time, it's become a tradition here on A View from the Bunker, the author of Interview with the Giant and Nephilim Dossier, the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. You find him online at tioba.org. That's what you call your basic acronym. And also his personal website, burtonbeyond.com. We welcome back to the program our friendly neighborhood PhD, Dr. Judd Burton. Judd, welcome back.
Thank you, Derek. Good to be here.
Witchcraft has always, at least in the 20th century, we go back a little further in American history, and we've got the famous or infamous Salem witch trials back in the late 17th century. But here in the 20th century, from programs, television programs like Bewitched, to more recent things, it really doesn't seem to be taken all that seriously anymore. And there seems to be a growing wave of popularity among women, especially in the United States, who see it as a return to a means of spirituality, or using spirituality to empower themselves. Why is this happening? Is there a disconnect with the actual history of where sorcery and witchcraft came from?
It's interesting that you should couch it in those terms about asking the question: are we just not paying attention to it? Or are we just not giving it any importance? Because throughout the history of the planet, cultures all over the globe have given great credence to the spiritual world because they've dealt with it every day. So perhaps that's a commentary on modern culture, particularly American culture, that we've, and maybe even the American church, that we've just sort of peripheralized it and thrown it on the exploded dust heap of superstition. But it is, in fact, something altogether other than superstition. It's just sort of backing it up a little. If we look at the anthropological definition of witchcraft, that is that, it's historical too in many ways. A witch is typically somebody operating contrary to the accepted norm of spirituality in a given culture. And to a degree, if you look at the Judeo-Christian roots of our own society, you could argue that the various species of witchcraft, whatever they may be in the modern American context, sort of fit that bill. But while they typically profess to be benevolent, the so-called white witchcraft movement. Again, looking at the issue through the anthropological, historical lens, that's not what you find in witchcraft over space and time. What you find are these specialized individuals who operate on the periphery of society in an attempt to bend natural law and spiritual law to their will, rather than, as say a Christian would submit to the will of God and the laws of nature that God has established. But even though you have, you mentioned the Witches Union, even though you have groups like this who are professing, that they're benevolent, you have to question how benevolent they are if they're willing to cast a hex against somebody. That also fits the traditional anthropological definition of a witch, is that they do these sort of ne'er-do-well activities that nobody else in the society will. But even so, they against the contrast of our traditional values in this country, they also fit the bill, so to speak, of the classical definition of the witch. But we can certainly flesh that out as we go along this evening.
Well, witchcraft was not unknown in the ancient world. I mean, certainly God was aware that witches were a thing. Otherwise, he would not have instructed Moses to tell the Israelites, don't consult with sorcerers, don't consult with other alternate forms of spirituality like necromancy and consulting mediums and so forth. But sorcery, there's a very famous verse in the Bible, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Seems pretty harsh. And again, that's probably where the prosecutors of the Salem witch trials took their inspiration and justification. But I think the deeper message there is that the knowledge, the awareness that there are those who practiced these dark arts goes back, well, at least to the time of Moses, which is 3,400 years ago. And even further, if those who study ancient Babylonian texts, from the time of Abraham and earlier, are aware that witches were a thing back then. There were incantations and spells that were intended to perform certain acts or derive certain benefit from the spirit realm, others that were intended to protect one from the spirit realm. So since Christianity and Judaism did not invent witchcraft, the question, I think, then becomes, where did it originate? Where did people begin to get the idea that if they performed a certain ritual and did it the right way, spoke the right words, sacrificed the right kind of animal, that somehow the gods or the spirits would be obliged to do what they wanted?
Right. There's a verse in 1 Samuel chapter 15, I think it's verse 23, where the author equates witchcraft with rebellion. Witchcraft is as the sin of rebellion. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the reference here of rebellion is the angelic rebellion that took place. And that this is an allusion back to the antediluvian world and the sin of the Watchers.
That's interesting. I don't mean to interrupt, but that's interesting. That's the first time I'd considered that possibility. That was the sin of rebellion was not just, not doing what you're told, but referring to a specific rebellion, the rebellion of the angels who kept not their first estate or who left their proper position. That's an interesting take on that. I had not considered that before.
Well, that's the gravity of the situation here, is that these were skills that were taught by the Watchers to humanity in exchange for genetic access, so that they could produce the Nephilim and the Chimera that existed in the pre-flood world. If you look at particularly Enoch and to a lesser degree other apocryphal works, but if you look there, you get a good sense of the kinds of skills that were being taught by these fallen angels. And it's a mixture of practical sciences and occult and magic skills. Witchcraft, if you will, because there are things like, in addition to star watching, which was, of course, astronomy and astrology in the ancient world are very, very connected, almost indistinguishable in some cases. But, things like spell casting and charms and root cutting and how to do abortions and, there's a whole litany of things that the Watchers teach to humanity in exchange for this genetic access. And this, quite frankly, sets the model for the kind of anthropological definition of a witch that I was talking about, the one that you see that's most perennial around the world, not only over geographical space, but historical time as well. This one-on-one tutelage by a fallen spirit. These are the most dangerous kinds of witches. Not to say that witchcraft in general doesn't present its own kinds of dangers and all its kinds of variety. And of course, there's a whole taxonomy of the kinds of witchcraft that exist today and also in the past. They all present their own kinds of peculiar dangers. But this is the model of this malevolent specialist, if you will, and they're, whether it's male or female, they're given tutelage by a fallen spirit. It has all the hallmarks of later characterizations of witches, not only in the ancient world. You reference the Babylonian material, Mesopotamian material, and also the references in the Old Testament to these Canaanite priests and priestesses who would basically offer these kinds of services. But all throughout the ancient world, even the classical world, the Greeks and the Romans had the very self-same sorts of specialists that we would today call witches, that fit under that anthropological definition. But I'm convinced, and I wrote about this in Interview with the Giant. I devoted a chapter called The Primal Witch to this very thing, connecting, why the prohibitions were given with such gravitas against witchcraft. And I think that this verse in 1 Samuel 15 really drives that home.
This is interesting because there's a corollary. This I should say correlates with the Mesopotamian conception of the Apkallu. Amar Anus, a scholar from Estonia, has written about this in several papers, where he shows that the Apkallu, or the craftsmen, sometimes the word is translated, were considered the purveyors of this sort of magic. And while it would appear that the Apkallu are the origin of the Prometheus myth, they were considered the ones who brought the gifts of civilization to humanity on behalf of the god Enki, who was lord of the Apsu, or the abyss. But these Apkallu weren't always beneficent. Sometimes they were evil and could do harm. And for this, in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation account, the chief god Marduk says he lost his temper at one point. I'm really condensing it and paraphrasing. Caused a global flood and told the craftsmen, the Apkallu, to go down to the abyss and never to return. Well, of course, that's a twisted version of the story of the Titans, or the punishment of Prometheus for bringing the gifts of, forbidden knowledge to mankind. In the Greek myth, it was fire. But it's interesting that you've got those parallels that go back to other cultures, showing that this forbidden knowledge that mankind was not supposed to possess was brought to us through supernatural intervention.
That's right. And I believe one of the common translations of the titles of the Apkallu is the Seven Sages.
Yes.
It speaks. I know that there's some variety with the translation you can take there, but sage or craftsman, you're obviously talking about skilled entities who are purveying this skill in exchange for all kinds of relations with humanity. But yeah, it is interesting that if we're going to make this connection between witchcraft and the antediluvian world, and our first step, our grounding really is the biblical material and then the associated apocryphal material. And I think that it's important for people who are interested not only in the history of this, but especially for Christians, to be able to see these sorts of connections. That there are ancient foundations for these things, and it's not just out of harshness that Yahweh gave these prohibitions, but it was out of love to steer us away from the corruptive influence of the Watchers, of the fallen angels, and their progeny and the demons that would follow.
There's another connection here, speaking of the demons that would follow, because that's the Mount Hermon connection to the Watchers and the Nephilim. Your work for your dissertation on the religious history of Banias, the Grotto of Pan at the base of Mount Hermon, and the research you've done into the goat demon or goat god Azazel. The Book of Enoch lays a lot of the blame for this type of secret information or forbidden knowledge on Azazel. I've got the Hermania translation, which is a more modern translation of the Book of Enoch by the scholar George W.E. Nicholsburg, and they translate Azazel as Azael, but Azael is one who was responsible for some of this information. The chief of the Watchers, Shemiyaza, taught spells and the cutting of roots. Another one named Hermione, which I think is just a variant of Hermon, which, as Mike Heiser has pointed out, is based on the root behind the word cherem, which means forbidden or under the ban. Hermione taught sorcery for the loosing of spells and magic and skill. So, it is interesting that you've got Azazel, who was singled out for the odd release of the goat on whom all the sins of the tribes were placed. The goat loosed into the desert for Azazel. And Shemiyaza as the leader of the Watchers. If you equate the Watchers of the Jewish cosmology with the Titans of the Greeks, you would have to say that there's a good chance that this Shemiyaza was Kronos of Titan, or of Greek mythology.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, there's this connective tissue that we're getting at with Azazel. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I'm also convinced that the later cult to Pan was simply a continuation of a cult that was dedicated to Azazel, and then later variations of Azazel, like Odds and Hoods, that were worshipped in that area by a number of people, including the Amorites, actually.
Sure. And as I think we talked before, you would equate that with the land of Uz, that was the homeland of Job of the Bible, correct?
Yes, that's a distinct possibility. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the more that I've thought about that, which, given the conditions in the story of Job and the tone of Job, it wouldn't surprise me a great deal if Uds were in that vicinity. You read through, and there's a lot of, it's one of the few places in the Bible where you get this how should I phrase it? You get a glimpse into the interaction of angelic beings.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, getting back to the Azazel Pan connection, Pan, the Greek god Pan, usually people think of the connection between Pan and shepherds or goat herds, and he certainly was. But there are also a lot of other attributes that deal with more spiritual, metaphysical elements. Pan was also a god of dreams. He was a god of magic. He was also a god of oracles. Pan was also associated with warcrafts. He fought alongside Zeus against Typhon.
Right. In fact, Zeus would have been defeated had it not been for Pan's intervention.
That's right. And so, you look at Azazel, and you've also got a lot of these general sorts of characteristics. Azazel introduces metallurgy and sword making and spear making, but he also teaches this corruption of higher spiritual practices, and he's it's very clear in Enoch he's given the bulk of the blame, ascribed all sin, and that, again, this ties back into your connection with the Azazel goat. So there, and if you look at Pan, there are other iterations of Pan and Azazel that you find around the world, but I'm convinced that they're one and the same. There's a link that you can trace back all the way to the antediluvian world, and Azazel, along with the other watchers, are at the center of this creation of what we would call witchcraft.
What's really interesting to me, and I think I'm going to have to explore this in a book project that I'm working on right now, even though it's not. Well, no, I guess it would be central to it, because the entity I'm going to write about is the one that's named in the Book of Enoch as Shemiyaza, known under a variety of names in the ancient world, including Dagon and Enlil and Baal Haman and so forth. We've talked before about the geographic location that we're discussing here. The land of Uz, that where Job resided, scholars pretty much agree was in the Transjordan, so east of the Jordan River, somewhere between Mount Hermon and maybe the Red Sea somewhere, not certain where, but that's an area that was known to be occupied by the Rephaim tribes, at least until the time of Abraham, when the kings from the east came to do battle against the coalition from Sodom and Gomorrah. The origin point for the myths, for many of for the various myths ascribed to this old deity, Kronos, Baal Haman, Shemiyaza, all point to that region along the Jordan Rift, or the Great Rift Valley, which extends from Turkey all the way down to Madagascar, but specifically between the Dead Sea and northern Syria. One of the things Sharon and I discovered recently is that there are a lot of megalithic cemeteries clustered along the Jordan Rift for some reason. But the early myths, or the oldest myths connected to this old entity, cluster from Mount Hermon up to the Amanus Mountains, which are in Turkey, just north and east of that Gulf of Iskenderun, north of ancient Antioch, and somewhere in that vicinity. Now, when you bring the Amorites into this, the tribe that was called the Suteans, they're mentioned in the Bible as the sons of Sheth in Numbers 24. They likewise occupied the Transjordan. They were called Suteans by the Akkadians and the Babylonians. Were nomadic tribes that occupied the deserts and the steppes of Syria, essentially Syria and Iraq, pretty much the area that was controlled by the Islamic State in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
Their home base was believed to be the steppes in Syria between Palmyra and, was it Deir ez-Zor? There's a mountain there called Bashar, Mount Bashar. And according to some texts that were written in Akkadian from the time of Abraham, these Suteans were considered to be practitioners of black magic, like the Elamites. I guess, now maybe this was just a case of the people who lived in what we would call Babylonia, demonizing people who were outside their borders. Maybe
yes,
somebody wanting to make Babylon great again or something. I don't know.
Right. Sort of like the Romans would call the country dwellers pagan. Pagan just basically means country bum.
Exactly. But there are texts that demonized the Suteans as practitioners of black magic, and there were texts that were intended to protect one against these Suteans. The interesting thing about the Suteans is that it appears that before the time of Abraham, they were known by a different name, which is the Tadanu, and that was the origin of the name that the Greeks gave their old gods, the Titans. Again, going back to the research of scholar Amar Anus. So there seems to be this connection between this group, this tribe, mentioned in Numbers 24, the sons of Sheth, the Suteans, were well known and considered dangerous by most of the inhabitants of Mesopotamia, and the old Amorite tribe called the Tadanu that was so feared by the last Sumerian kings of Mesopotamia that they built a 175-mile wall to keep them out of what is now southern Iraq, out of the core of the Sumerian homeland. And so you've got, but the link there again between the Tadanu and the Titans is that perhaps these people, this old ancient Amorite tribe, which the royal houses of the Amorites, as far as we know, traced their ancestry or claimed descent from. Hammurabi the Great and other Amorite kingdoms traced their ancestry back to this tribe. Was there something about this group that was, were they the ones who basically preserved the knowledge that was handed down on Mount Hermon because their point of origin came from that direction? They were believed to have, scholars believe that they moved into Sumer, southeast Iraq, from western Mesopotamia, the region that we're talking about, western and northern Syria, that appears to be ground zero for the Watchers' original incursion.
Mm-hmm.
We can't know for sure, but the evidence seems to keep pointing back in that geographic area.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And when you look at here's something else to chew on. I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but things pop into my head. This is how I kind of sort through ideas. Kind of drives Sharon nuts because she actually thinks before she speaks. I have to speak to actually think.
No worries.
In the Old Testament, the prophets essentially used the Amorites as a yardstick, like a yardstick to measure evil. The kings of Judah and Israel were condemned by saying, they did more evil than they, continued in the practices of the Amorites. Manasseh, who was the most evil king of Judah, passed his son through the fire, sacrificed his son to the god Moloch. He kind of, he was singled out. He said he did more evil than even what the Amorites had done. But by the time of Manasseh in the 7th century BC, the Amorites were no longer called. They had essentially ceased to be as an ethnicity. They disappeared around the time of the Judges, so they hadn't even been on the scene for 600 years at least. And yet the prophets in the Old Testament were still referring back to the Amorites to say, "Oh, this guy's so bad. He's almost as bad as the Amorites." Their wickedness was legendary, and I wonder if it actually goes back even farther than when they were called the Amorites, when they were called something else, or at least that particular tribe was called something else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have, something that they did, or a collection of things that they did, burned itself into the cultural memory of the Jews, so much so that they were, up until the the Second Temple period, into the Common Era. They're still the Jews are still referring to the sin of the Amorites and using it as a yardstick. As you were talking, I was thinking about all the possible meanings of the word Rephaim. All its translations as shades and dead ancestors and all of this. In conjunction with the geographical parameters of the Rephaim and their close association, with the Amorites, it just, it begs many of the questions that you're proposing, and it's giving me some new things to think about in terms of projects that I'm working on as well. Not the least of which is the aforementioned Serpent Mound project.
Right.
Doug Burton. Yeah.
And for listeners who might not know what we're talking about, refer you back to the program that we recorded with Judd Burton and Doug Van Dorn just a few weeks ago on the Serpent Mound in Bashan, ancient Bashan. It's on the Golan Heights, east of the Sea of Galilee, but would seem to suggest that we might have stumbled onto the reason that region in the Ugaritic tongue, which is similar to Hebrew, literally means place of the serpent. But, and interesting too, and this is another oddball connection that just occurred to me. I just remembered one of the Egyptian execration texts, which was their form of witchcraft, sort of like a voodoo doll sort of thing. They would inscribe curses on pottery, and then of their enemies, then curse the pottery and then smash it, because that was believed to bring bad luck. And one of the enemies that the Egyptians cursed around the time of Abraham was named Job. Mm-hmm. And he was supposedly the ruler of Ashtaroth, which was one of the cities ruled by Og of Bashan about 500 years later when Moses and the Israelites showed up.
And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from the Hermon region.
Well, yeah, about 30 miles. You can see Mount Hermon very plainly from Gilgal Rephaim.
Yep.
And from Ashtaroth too. So, well, again, that seemed Hermon, the connection again being where the Watchers descended, made a mutual pact to not only take human women, but to corrupt humanity through teaching us things we weren't supposed to know. And that is the general area from which the Amorites eventually emigrated into what is now Iraq, founded the kingdom of Babylon and a few other places, but Babylon obviously the best known, which was known for its spiritual wickedness, including witchcraft and sorcery.
That's right.
So renowned for that the Apostle John was inspired by the Holy Spirit to use Babylon as a symbol of, well, the end-time church of the Antichrist.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it all comes full circle into the New Testament. And, there were also lots of, I'm sure in the minds of other teachers and writers like Paul, especially, Paul talks about this stuff in virtually every letter he writes. I'm thinking about, Galatians, Ephesians, there's Acts chapter 19, it's, the prohibitions should be even more stark in the New Testament, given all of the cultural legacy that we've been talking about, the historical legacy behind witchcraft, which in the case of particularly people that lived in the Levant, they would have been, especially the Jews, would have been familiar, of all the connections and connotations. I've talked extensively about Jesus' stop at Caesarea Philippi and all of the tradition of the Watchers and the Rephaim and just the geographical locale, all of that, the gates of hell, all of that made such a huge impact, would have made such a huge impact on the disciples while Jesus is saying all of this stuff. And the same thing goes for all the prohibitions against witchcraft and necromancy and divination and all these sorts of things that the later Christian converts and apostles are making as they're writing their materials and witnessing, giving this testimony to people. To some extent, those connections would have been in the minds of Jews who were listening to their message, and indeed in the ancient Levant as well.
So this is another example of the type of evil that when Mike Heiser wrote his book, Reversing Hermon, that he would have included. I mean, this was an inextricable part of the evil that was brought to the world by the Watchers. It wasn't just that they inflicted these evil, violent, insatiable giants upon the world. It's that this desire to try to manipulate the supernatural realm through root cuttings and incantations and spells was part of the deal.
Yes, and what they did was institutionalize it in human culture. It wasn't just that this was that this was forbidden knowledge, corrupted knowledge. That was essentially transdimensional. It's from another place. It's that it was so pervasive, that it ensconced itself in all of human culture, and that knowledge didn't, all of it didn't die out with the flood, because you had these entities that survived that in spirit form. Talking about the Nephilim, the destruction of the Nephilim, who carried on that knowledge and were able to, in the classical format of the teaching of a witch, a demon teaching those skills directly to a witch. If there were other incursions by fallen angels after the flood, which I believe there were, you would have a similar sort of thing in the very primeval Neolithic post-flood world. You would have a lot of the similar kinds of tutelages taking place, but it's very clear that these were not practices that were meant for only one group of people, but that they were to infect humanity and ensconce themselves so much that, as I say, they became a sort of institution in all of human culture, because, again, here we are millennia later,
and we're still talking about it.
Anthropologists and historians, theologians, scholars of every bent, whether they believe in Christ or not, attest to these sorts of practices being done in some form or fashion in virtually all cultures of the world.
Mm-hmm. And we see the influence on pop culture every year at Halloween, and the entertainment that makes it into our homes via television, video games, movies, and so forth. It's interesting that one of the great heroes of Babylon, Gilgamesh, who was the king of Uruk several generations after the flood, 2 generations after Nimrod, but adopted as sort of a culture hero by Babylon, was considered, what was he? The term was master of the Apkallu. A couple of cylinder seals have been found describing Gilgamesh as master of the Apkallu. Now, that seems to suggest that, again, the Babylonian pride in their mastery of the supernatural realm and performing the rites and rituals the right way. We've restored the knowledge that was lost during the Great Flood. We've brought back the knowledge that the Apkallu had brought to humanity before Marduk had banished them to the abyss. So there was this pride there that Babylon had in being almost the curators of this sort of knowledge and information. And this is a point that Mike made in his book, The Unseen Realm, which I thought was well, jaw-dropping. When we look at the Rephaim, who were down to just Og of Bashan by the time of Moses and the Israelites, Og was the last of the remnant of the Rephaim after Moses and the Israelites dispensed with him. The neighboring Canaanites, the Ugaritic culture, they knew who the Rephaim were. Texts that have been found a couple hundred years later, there are several that make reference to the Rephaim specifically, but by the time of the Ugaritic culture, and then later the references by Isaiah and Ezekiel, always place them in the underworld. They're dead, they're gone, they're spirits. They were the spirits of the kings, all who were leaders of the earth. Isaiah 14. Og was the first target by Moses and the Israelites. I mean, when you go to Jordan and you look at how inhospitable that land is, and you say, okay, we're here, we can cross the river, and the Jordan River is kind of disappointing. When you're an American, you've heard the stories and the spiritual songs and the gospel songs about the mighty Jordan, and you realize here in the United States, we'd call it a creek.
It's a creek.
Yeah. No, they had to, God had to stop it supernaturally so they could cross. It's like, well, maybe it was a lot wider 3,400 years ago, because today you could wade across. It's not a big deal. Still, they were there. You could see Jericho on the other side of the river. And God says, no, you're going to march at least 2 weeks to get to the north end of the Jordan Valley and take on an army there led by this last of the Rephaim, and maybe fight some other Amorites on the way. God had a reason for making them do that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Moses makes that curious reference to the size of Og's bed. And most people, 4 cubits by 9 cubits. Well, or 6 cubits, 9 cubits. So Og must have been 13 feet tall. Well, no, when you compare this, and this is the point Mike made in his book, it matches exactly the dimensions of the cultic bed in the Temple of Marduk in Babylon that was used for ritual sex, or it was believed that Marduk and his consort came down every year at the New Year festival, the Akitu festival, and had ritual sex. So what Moses was actually doing was connecting Og and the Rephaim and the Amorites to what was going on at the Amorite kingdom of Babylon. The same spiritual wickedness, the same sorcery, occult practices, and witchcraft that God had condemned. And again, I think it's significant that God had them target Og first before they marched back south and then crossed over at Jericho.
Yeah, without a doubt. Just the superficial reading of the text, it makes you think that, those are some strange marching orders, God, but okay. No, there was, just like everything, there's this nuanced purpose when you understand the context of the material for them entering at the north, and you just laid it out beautifully. Og was the for all intents and purposes, the caretaker, the torchbearer of this ancient primeval wickedness, which, as I said, had by that time long been in the process of institutionalizing itself in human culture.
Right, and ruling a kingdom that the Ugaritic culture was firmly aware was the literal entrance to the netherworld.
That's right.
Well, there's a lot more there, but I think we've established at least the history, the basis of it, which I think is good, because we've talked about this subject before and focused more on the European concept of witchcraft and on the modern culture and how it's being sold to kids. But I don't think we've really attacked, or not attack's not the right word, but we discussed the Mesopotamian origins of all of this and the pre-Mesopotamian origins going back all the way to Mount Hermon. And I think with the research that you've been doing and where Sharon and I have been led recently, this is stuff that we're digging deeper into. And I think we're on the verge of spending a lot more time on it. 2020, we'll be digging a lot deeper into this stuff. And how it's still influencing the world to this day. I guess to put
it, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you were to kind of put a bow on all of this, as Americans, again, we're kind of oblivious to all of this. American Christians, we're sort of oblivious to all of this history, and so we don't see the issue with celebrating Halloween because, it's just a bit of harmless fun. Watching horror movies, letting our kids dress up as ghosts and demons and devils and whatnot. What would be your, recommendation, your counsel, your guidance to American Christians as we approach Halloween?
Derek, I'm more and more persuaded that that our associations, however innocuous they may seem with these sorts of images, and I'm speaking, when I say our associations, I'm talking about the church. We need to distance ourselves from them. There are lots of alternatives that people can take advantage of. Churches typically do some sort of fall festival, and usually our conceptions of the fall have to do with the harvest and being thankful and Thanksgiving, that sort of thing. There are all sorts of alternatives to adopting these images, and the more that I learn about, particularly the Rephaim and this trail that we've been on, the more I'm persuaded to distance myself from those. I try not to tell people how to live their lives, but at the same time, the imagery of evil is something that we're taught in the scriptures to again, distance ourselves away from and not adopt it. And I think it all goes back to the roots, the origins that we've been talking about tonight. I would say, I'm an old fan of the Hammer horror films. I think a lot of those films have good messages. Actually, they're sort of morality tales in a way. Mm-hmm. You can watch that sort of thing any old time. It's another conversation you and I have had about good triumphing over evil, and that seems to be lost in the popularity of today's anti-hero vampires and werewolves and zombies and fill in the blank. We've made all those, on a popular level, we've made all those things heroes, mm-hmm. where once they were rightly condemned. You can watch that stuff any old time of the year. But there are certain things that we have talked about over, in the 10 years that we've been doing these shows around this time, about the nature of this time of the year, that the church should be very mindful about and vigilant about and prayerful against, I think. Again, this isn't necessarily a prohibition to tell your kids not to trick or treat or whatever, but as I say, I'm increasingly persuaded and convicted to distance myself from those kinds of, the imagery of Halloween, as it were. I would encourage people to think about and pray about those things as well, because it's not a joke. If you talk to people who have been involved or brutalized by the occult, by things like witchcraft and necromancy, the Halloween is not something that they take part in for the most part. They don't take it as particularly if they've converted to Christianity, if they have a relationship with Jesus. You talk to them, and Halloween is completely anathema, as it should be.
Yeah, that's it. I think for most of us, we have fallen victim, and I, include myself in this until fairly recently in my life, fairly late in life. The line by Baudelaire that was paraphrased in the movie The Usual Suspects, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. And I think most American Christians fall into that trap. We don't believe he's really real. But when you meet someone who's been through ritual abuse of one sort or another, or somebody who's come out of the New Age movement and now have become good friends with one and, a colleague of another who will tell stories about things that they've personally experienced, and knowing them well enough to know that they're productive, intelligent, rational, balanced, happy, now Christians, I don't think they're making stuff up, but it's not the kind of thing I've ever been, able to see, and I don't want to see, frankly. So there are too many people I know who are rational, who have seen things that I think had I seen the same thing would feel the same way. You don't mess with that realm. And yet for us in America, a nominally Christian nation, Halloween is the second most popular, and you could almost make the case the most popular holiday with adults on the annual calendar. Mm-hmm. And for Christians, it shouldn't, well, it's an opportunity to witness, perhaps. I mean, we can't influence the culture if we cut ourselves off from it and hide behind the walls of a compound. But on the same,
that's right.
At the same time, we need to be aware and cognizant of how we interact at a time like this.
I agree. We need to think missiologically about those things and in the ways that we engage with culture. And I think that a lot of churches over the years have done a good job of that. I think of the hell houses, the alternative to the haunted house. Mm-hmm. I was, let's see, oh my goodness, this is going to date me. 25 years ago, I was involved in a Hill House production, and it's a little controversial, for some people, but it has the same kind of imagery that Halloween does in a way, but it at the forefront is the message of salvation. That's the thing that they're, that's getting pushed, in every room or every chapter, of the Hell House that you go through. So, I always thought that was a very creative way to engage the culture at that time of the year. I also know people that hand out tracts, things like that. If they have trick-or-treaters that come to their door, they'll give them candy, but they'll also give them, a tract or something. Mm-hmm. So there are ways that we can, and those are just that's two things. There are ways that we can engage the culture at this time of the year and talk about the severity, behind what seems to be a very innocuous holiday.
Mm-hmm. Judd, the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, between that and the other projects you're working on, what can people expect to see coming from you here in the near future, and where would they go to follow your work?
Well, in one word, lots. I do have a lot of irons in the fire right now, including I'm about to make a move, so I've been packing and writing and cleaning and everything in between. But people can keep up with me at burtonbeyond.com and also the Institute of Biblical Anthropology website, tioba.org. I've got some book deals going on. One of the deals is related somewhat to what we talked about tonight. It's called It's Alive for 55, and for $55, people get a collection of sources on this kind of material, including a book on the history of Halloween.
Cool.
William Godwin's book on the history of magic and the occult, which is a good resource to have. People can go to my website at to find that. I'm still running my apprenticeship through the Institute. It's still $200. It probably will be until December, until I update some of the platforming. And working on a project with Doug Van Dorn on the Serpent Mound. Dr. Aaron Judkins and I are working on a book on Göbekli Tepe, trying to get that, fiercely writing at it. And I've got a stack of half and quarter finished books that I'm going to be able to get to finally. And I had hoped to have one of those done this week. I didn't quite get it done, but please look for the Book of the Gray, which is going to be on witchcraft. It's a collection of essays that I've done over the years on the history and culture of witchcraft, both modern and ancient.
The Book of the Gray or Grave?
The Book of the Gray, Gray.
Okay. The Book of the Gray. All right. And, is there an estimated time for the DVD set for this year's Sons of God, Giants of Old conference?
That's right. Our esteemed videographer, Joe Grimes, tells me that he's in the final stages of getting everything done, and he's just about ready to render everything. His goal was the end of October, and we're going to just about have that ready. So the DVD for Sons of God 7 should be ready early November, certainly in time for Christmas.
All right, let us know, and we'll put that out there, because that was a great conference. The stuff that Mike Heiser brought, Aaron Judkins, Joe Taylor, Greg Reed, fascinating stuff, because his work into ritual abuse is where the rubber meets the road.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Websites, tioba.org and burtonbeyond.com. Dr. Judd Burton, author of The Interview with the Giant, The Nephilim Dossier, a number of other books, including the forthcoming book, a collection of essays on witchcraft, The Book of the Gray. Judd, always enjoy talking with you, brother, and look forward to see what we can put together. You got stuff in the fire, we got stuff in the fire, but it seems to be kind of pointing at the same target. So I really look forward to see what comes out in 2020.
We really are. We really are pulling at threads of the same tapestry. It was a pleasure as always, Derek. Thank you.
Dr. Judd Burton's websites, tioba.org and burtonbeyond.com. You'll find those in the show notes, vftb.net, or wherever else you're listening to this podcast. Just check the notes below the player. If you're watching this at YouTube, even though it's just a static image, they'll be down there as well. But do check out the website. Coming up, boy, we got a full calendar for 2020 already. We'll tell you where you can catch up with us and when. Tell you how you can get the brand new book that Sharon and I have just written. It is shipping in just a week or two. And some thoughts on the takedown of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker.
Unveiling the ancient realms of demonic kings and Satan's battle plan for Armageddon. SkyWatchTV is proud to announce 2 new special offers. The Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series. First, in Derek and Sharon Gilbert's new groundbreaking book, Veneration, you will learn how the giants of old shaped the worldview and religion of the Hebrews, and the role they will play in the end times. How veneration of the dead brought disaster on the Israelites. Concealed references of ancestor worship among the Canaanites, and so much more. But for a limited time only, when you purchase Veneration from SkyWatchTV, you'll also receive Realms of the Dead, Book 6 in the Red Wing Saga from Sharon K. Gilbert, that explores the true historical link between Mount Hermon and Jack the Ripper. The key characters of this supernatural thriller will face their most terrifying challenge yet, as a powerful new watcher has joined the confrontation that could bring forth the Antichrist and the end of days. But that's not all. You'll also receive the brand new DVD documentary, The Search for the Raphaim, where Derek and Sharon Gilbert take you on a guided tour of the Holy Land, ground zero in the long war with the fallen realm. You will see mysterious Gilgal Rephaim created for the veneration of the dead. The plains of Moab, where worshiping the god of the underworld brought disaster on Israel. And bonus teachings by guests like Pastor Carl Gallups and Messianic Rabbi Zev Parat. And for a limited time only, you'll receive absolutely free the brand new reprinting of the original 1921 classic work, Immortality and the Unseen World, which reveals the Hebrew concepts of the supernatural realm, death, angels, and demons. Sold separately, this exclusive offer retails for $90. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. But wait, now you have the option to upgrade and expand your collection by including all 5 previously released books in the Red Wing Saga, where you'll learn spiritual warfare through gripping stories with characters you'll love. The expanded collection, which includes all 8 books and the Search for the Rephaim DVD documentary, holds a retail value of $190. Yours now for your donation of only $100 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. Order the Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series now. Available at SkyWatchTVstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Dropping a reality bomb every Sunday night from the heart of the Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next Sunday night, the program that I told you last week would be next week's program, which is this week. But this week being the Halloween week, of course, we had to do the traditional Halloween week program. So the program I told you last week for this week will actually be for next week. And that is Carl Teichrieb, author of Game of Gods. He was recently at Burning Man. He's done that for a couple of years in a row now. He will tell us what he saw there and why it's relevant to you. It's not just a bunch of hippies out there dancing and partying in the desert. There are a lot of very important people who go there, leaders in the fields of technology, business, and a lot of average folk like you and me, people we'd see in our community who go to Burning Man looking for something to change their lives. That's why they call these transformational festivals. Carl Teichrieb talks about that next Sunday night, November 3rd, 2019, here on A View from the Bunker. By the time you hear this, you will know that the United States has successfully, terminated. It sounds clinical, but I guess it's accurate. The leader of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. President Trump made the announcement to the nation this morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I saw this pop up on social media last night. I followed the president's Twitter feed, and I saw when he tweeted, "Something very big is happening in Syria. We'll tell you tomorrow." I'm like, okay. And so then a very quick search found reports. Newsweek actually broke the story. Newsweek is not the same Newsweek that it used to be, by the way. Newsweek went out of business, went broke, and at bankruptcy auction, the name was purchased by another company. But still, the reporters for Newsweek were the first one on the story that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who, according to one source out of Turkey, had only arrived in Idlib province, this is northwestern Syria, still under the control of Islamic rebels. He'd only arrived there about 48 hours before U.S. Special Forces arrived. And according to the president's description of events, he was chased into a tunnel, took 3 children with him, a dead-end tunnel where he, detonated an explosive vest or a belt which ended his own life and those of the 3 children that he had dragged in there with him. Not the end, I suppose. Not the end we'd certainly want for those children. I certainly don't glory in the death of any human. But given the atrocities that the Islamic State has committed in the name of their religion over the last 4 years since the caliphate was declared in June of 2015, it's hard to feel sorry that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is no longer drawing breath on this earth. My most recent book, Bad Moon Rising, offers some insight. I'm certainly not an expert on Islam like those who have studied it for their entire lives, but I think from a spiritual standpoint, it offers some insight into what motivates men to follow an Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. As Dr. Timothy Furnish has told us on this program several times, Sunni Islam like that preached by al-Baghdadi. The Salafists believe that they can trigger the end of days, the apocalypse, and that any sufficiently religious man can declare himself the Mahdi, raise up an army, and try to bring forth the Mahdi to lead them to glorious, victorious global jihad. It didn't quite work out that way for al-Baghdadi and his followers, but we Westerners, and myself included here, until I started reading up on this to try to get a better understanding of why anyone would follow a religion that is so bloody, had not realized that al-Baghdadi is just the last in a line of self-proclaimed Mahdis through history. He's just the most recent one. There will be others until Jesus comes back to put a stop to all of this. So, kudos to our soldiers who successfully carried out this raid. Apparently, there was only one injury, and that was a dog with the canine unit in the compound there, slightly injured. None of the soldiers, U.S. soldiers, were injured. So praise God for that. We are grateful that al-Baghdadi is no longer leading what's left of the Islamic State, but they will be back. They're like cockroaches, and they will pop up again elsewhere. The question now becomes what to do with the American soldiers still in Syria. And this is an argument that's been ongoing ever since the president announced his decision to remove 50 or so American soldiers in the immediate vicinity of an imminent conflict between the Turkish military and Kurdish forces in northern Syria, to pull about 1,000 American troops who were in that area completely out through Iraq. Then it was announced more American troops were going back into Syria, into eastern Syria, the region around Deir ez-Zor, which is an oil-rich region, to keep that oil, we're told, out of the hands of the Islamic State. I think the truth is it's to keep it out of the hands of Bashar al-Assad. The deep state really, really wants a war in Syria. And I've had some online discourse the last few days about the way the Kurds are being treated in all of this. And I certainly understand those who think that we have abandoned the Kurds once again. I get that. The Kurds have been getting a raw deal for centuries. They were the only group, the largest group of people to come out of World War I without any kind of self-determination. They didn't get their own country. There are 30 million of them now scattered between 4 different countries, and none of those countries wants them to have an independent Kurdistan. The Turks are especially harsh on them. For the last 40 years, they've had a low-grade civil war going in southeastern Turkey. And you can understand why the Turks are upset. The Kurds are upset. The Turks want to exterminate their culture, essentially. Outlaw the language, outlaw their dress, and so on. But is it the job of the United States? This is the question at the end of the day. Is it the job of the United States to militarily impose an independent Kurdish state on Turkey? Because that's really the only thing that's going to solve this problem, and probably would require an ongoing American military presence to police it and to enforce it and to keep it from turning violent again. So yes, the Kurds are getting a raw deal. I know that. I just don't see a good solution here. American forces shouldn't have been in there in the first place. President Obama promised no boots on the ground, and suddenly there are soldiers, boots on the ground. The deep state really, really wants war in Syria for some reason, and we don't know. We can speculate, but someday it will all be revealed, and the best we can hope for is that is just to take God at His word. Vengeance is His, and He will repay. So pray for the Kurds. Pray for what's left of the Christian communities in northern Syria and the Assyrian Christians in Iraq, because the last 2 decades of their lives, especially the Assyrian Christians, ever since 2003, when we decided to go in, that we just had to take out Saddam Hussein, we essentially signed a death warrant for the Christian community in northern Iraq. That's on us, the United States. No. Busy schedule coming up in 2020. I'm going to run these down as quickly as I can, but of course, you know me, I tend to get gabby, so we'll see how pithy I can actually make this. A pretty full dance card already coming in 2020. Begins in March, and we've been blessed to do a lot of traveling in 2019, but I can tell you, Sharon and I, very happy to have about 5 months here at home where we can just kind of focus on research and writing without having to travel. So by the time March comes around, we'll probably be ready for it again. But anyway, March 6th through 8th, the Hear the Watchman Conference returns to Dallas. This is at the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center in Grapevine, Texas. Speakers to be announced. Keep your eyes on hearthewatchmen.com for more information there, hearthewatchmen.com. In April, we go overseas. We're going to Scotland. So if you're in the UK or Scotland, we would love to see you. April 24th, 25th, 26th of 2020, we'll be in Troon, which is in Ayrshire. It's, if I remember the map correctly, a little north of Glasgow. Hope that's right. We'll be at Walker Hall in Troon, Ayrshire, along with Jim Barfield, director of the Copper Scroll Project, Pastor Billy Crone, and an Irish evangelist, Stephen Wright. We'll be there speaking over the course of 3 days. And the cost, £54.50 for 3 days. Single-day tickets available for $29.50. And you can find out more information at scottishbibleprophecyconference.brushfire.com. That's Scottish Bible Prophecy Conference, all one word, .brushfire.com. The Scottish Bible Prophecy Conference in Troon at the end of April 2020, April 24th through 26th. In June, we'll be at the Battle Ready Conference in San Antonio. This is from the people who brought us the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference. It's back at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio. The dates, June 25th through 28th in San Antonio. That's the Grand Hyatt on the Riverwalk. Speakers include Russ Dizdar, Pastor Carl Gallups, Brandon Gallups, Rabbi Zev Porat, Stephen Bankires, and I'm sure more to come. There'll be a special pre-conference concert, worship, by Cutlass on June 25th. That's a Thursday evening. For more information, battlereadyconference.org. That's battlereadyconference.org. In July, True Legends returns to Branson, and I am honored to be one of the speakers this year. I've been blessed to serve as the Master of Ceremonies the last 2 years. This year, I'll be one of the speakers. It's back at the Mansion Theater in Branson, July 10th through 12th of 2020. Steve Quayle, L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Gary Wayne, Dr. Michael Lake, Carl Tykrib, and more. The theme this year, fascinating, ancient cataclysms and coming catastrophes, pre-Adam, and the return of the days of Noah. So that's pretty broad, but fascinating stuff. And the research we've been doing, Sharon and me, plus research I'm doing for my next book, our next 2 books together with me and Sharon, right in the wheelhouse for this. Pre-Adam and the Return of the Days of Noah. The True Legends Conference in Branson, July 10th through 12th, 2020. For more information, gen6.com, GENSIX.com. Then, in August, the Defender Conference from SkyWatchTV, the theme Stand 2020. This is the last weekend in August 27th through 30th. This will be the event of the season. It's at the Chateau on the Lake in Branson, a beautiful facility. And the speakers list, get this, Pat Boone, Governor Mike Huckabee, Dr. Elvita King, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, Tom Horn, who says this may be the last conference at which he speaks ever. First one it'll be the first conference he speak at in 4 years. Other speakers include Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Michael Heiser, Yaku Buyans, and of course all of us from Skywatch TV, including me, Sharon, Josh Peck, Donna Howell, Joe Artis Horn, and more. So an incredible lineup that weekend. Everything from, this is just going to be an amazing gathering. And for more information, and you want to act quickly on this one, because this one I can tell you is already about 75% sold out. DefenderConference.com for the Skywatch TV Defender Conference in 2020. Then, in September, Sharon and I doing something new. Next September, the Glacier Prophecy Summit. The Glacier Prophecy Summit. This is a cruise, an Alaska cruise from Seattle to Alaska, along with Gary Stearman, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Billy Crone, Jeff Kinley, Dr. Larry Ollison, and Bob Ulrich. September 6th through 13th of 2020. Some amazing natural scenery and some gifted speakers. Sharon and I both speaking on this tour, on this cruise. So if you've never done an Alaska cruise, which neither of us have ever done, we're looking forward to this. The Glacier Prophecy Summit, September 6th through 13th of 2020. For more information, glacierprophecysummit.com. Then in October, the SkyWatch TV Tour of Israel. We're hoping for cooler weather. This year in May, we had several days on the high side of 100, a couple days above 110, and 3 separate days where the heat got to me, and I had to, I had to go sit down and drink a lot of water and take some salt. So we're hoping October will be more pleasant. LipkinTours.com has all the information. The dates, October 12th through 25th. The extension, the 4-day extension, if you'd like to continue with us and see the megalithic sites of Sardinia, we'll go to that island, the mysterious island off the west coast of Italy, where we'll show you the only ziggurat in Europe, plus the tombs of the giants, and explore the connections between the Nuragic culture, the ancient Nuragic civilization of Sardinia, and one particular site, a biblical site from the Old Testament where the general Sisera, you remember the one who got the tent peg in his head? Yeah, probably came from Sardinia. So what's the connection, not just historically, but spiritually, between those sites? Again, October 12th through 25th with an optional 4-day extension through the 29th in Sardinia. And then, as an added bonus, if you're interested in just going to Sardinia, and seeing the sites there, we're doing a separate tour of Sardinia, October 29th through November 5th. This will be Sardinia only, and you'll find out more there at LipkinTours.com. So a lot on the plate for 2020, and we hope you can take advantage of one or more of those opportunities to catch up with us. Again, the brand new book by Sharon and me, Veneration, is just about back from the printer. Should be shipping very, very soon. Hopefully very, very soon. Just completed edits on the documentary of our tour of Israel this year. Just did that last night, so that'll be going off the duplicator first thing tomorrow morning. Thankfully, they turn those around in a real hurry, so those will be back soon. Some fascinating stuff there, including the disclosure of a new serpent mound that had gone previously undiscovered, except for one fella. Credit to, we talked about it a couple of weeks here on this show. Doug Van Dorn spotted it about 6 years ago, but apparently the scholars have never noticed it before. We'll show you that as part of the tour DVD when you purchase the special Veneration package at the SkyWatch TV store. Well, please give us a review. A View from the Bunker at Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which is wherever fine podcasts are sold. Give us a like at Facebook. Remember, A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme, Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website is www.incompetech.com. Our opening announcer makes this sound much bigger than it is. D.C. Good. Please remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.